In Q1 2025, container traffic at China's southern ports dropped by 19%. At the same time, shipments from Vietnam to the US rose 18%. Mexico's exports hit a record high. India expanded its freight volume by 12%. The cargo didn't disappear. It just changed direction. At the port of Shenzhen, thousands of containers sit idle. Inside, apparel, electronics, steel rods, destined for Western markets. But no one is picking them up. Dock workers have been reassigned. Logistics firms parked half their fleets. Exporters turned to live streaming, selling shirts for $1 just to clear space. This isn't a slowdown. It's a reroute. And it's not an accident. It's strategy. When China's ports go quiet and its cargo sits untouched, the question isn't what went wrong. It's who replaced them, and why did it happen without firing a single shot? Start with the data. In April 2025, China's manufacturing PMI fell to 49.0, a clear signal of contraction, the lowest since the post-COVID shock of 2023. Exports dropped, orders vanished, and warehouses filled up. The biggest drop came from the United States. Trump's second-term trade policy raised tariffs up to 145% on more than 2,000 Chinese products. Low-value apparel, industrial tools, machine parts, no sector was spared. The de minimis loophole, once a lifeline for e-commerce sellers, was shut. Small packages now faced full taxes and inspections. Even platforms like Temu and Shein saw traffic fall by half. Shipping costs doubled. Delivery times stretched, and US buyers pulled out. But China didn't collapse, at least not immediately. Instead, it pivoted toward the global south, toward Europe, toward its own domestic market. That's where the second rupture began. By Q1 2025, over 20 countries introduced new trade barriers targeting Chinese goods. From Vietnam to Brazil, from the EU to Egypt. Not loud, not political, but technical. Carbon compliance, labor audits, origin traceability. The message was clear: you can produce, but we decide if we buy. The global export system is no longer just about cost. It's about trust. China once won by scale and speed. Now it loses by association. So Beijing responded. Local governments waived port fees. Banks issued new export credit lines. State media aired success stories of full ships and happy workers. But it didn't stop the bleeding. In just 3 months, over 5,000 garment factories shut down. 100-plus steel producers suspended operations. 800,000 industrial workers lost jobs. Shipping idle time increased by 43% in Shenzhen and Ningbo. Then came the fallback strategy: sell domestically. But consumer demand was already collapsing. Retail sales fell 4.2% year-on-year. Youth unemployment topped 21%, though no longer officially published. Household savings reached record highs. People weren't spending. They were hoarding. Why? Because 70% of wealth in China is trapped in real estate. And the property market is still falling. The core engine, make, move, sell, was broken. China could still make, could no longer move, and there was no one left to sell to. The ports didn't die overnight. They were buried layer by layer, first by policy, then by cost, then by silence. From the outside, China's trade slowdown looks like a market cycle. But inside, it feels different, feels final. Officially, things are fine. State television shows containers being loaded. Port officials give interviews about resilience. Trade reports mention temporary disruptions. But off-camera, the cranes barely move. In Shenzhen, internal port data shows average idle time per container has more than doubled since late 2024. Export volumes are down across every category: apparel, steel, electronics. Yet national media continues to broadcast last year's footage. The narrative is curated. The slowdown is denied. The problem is renamed as structural rebalancing. But the silence is telling. Social media posts discussing port congestion are deleted. Videos of empty docks are flagged. Exporters are warned not to damage national confidence in live streams. At least 40 million posts discussing job cuts and factory closures were removed in just Q1 2025. Even port workers are told not to speak. In some cities, they sign non-disclosure agreements in exchange for bonus payments. The strategy is clear. Don't admit weakness. Delay the reckoning. But reality doesn't wait for permission. In Ningbo, stacks of goods sit unsorted because international buyers never completed payment. In Qingdao, truckers refuse to make pickups. Fuel costs are too high, and there's no return cargo. In Guangzhou, exporters sell directly on Douyin one piece at a time, just to recover labor costs. This isn't a hiccup. It's a structural failure. And here's the hidden truth. The collapse didn't come from outside. Came from within. China built its entire export model on a fragile logic. Speed plus scale equals power. But that formula only works when demand is infinite, when buyers are loyal, when trust is implicit. In 2025, none of those conditions hold. China didn't lose a war. It lost the privilege of being essential. It wasn't replaced by force. It was bypassed by strategy. And now its ports are still open. But no one is coming. This wasn't a disruption. It was a redesign. Over the past 5 years, the world quietly rewired its supply chains. Not through sanctions, but through standards. The United States didn't just raise tariffs. It rewrote the rules. Starting with the Fair Trade Enforcement Act, every imported product must now disclose its full origin trail, from raw material to final packaging. Every supplier, every subcontractor, verified. Then came the shift of capital. The U.S. passed the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and expanded trade programs under the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Billions were redirected away from China, toward friendly nations, stable partners, and secure infrastructure. The strategy wasn't loud, but it was precise. By early 2025, the global trade map no longer revolved around one center. It fractured into coordinated regional blocks. The United States linked supply chains through Mexico, Canada, and Southeast Asia. The European Union rebalanced toward Eastern Europe, Turkey, and North Africa. India deepened ties with South Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. The cargo flows didn't stop. They just moved. Around China, not through it. Meanwhile, Beijing stayed the course. Same ports, same model, same assumptions. That volume would protect it. That no one could afford to cut them out. That factory of the world was a permanent title. But in 2025, that assumption is gone. This is strategic substitution. China wasn't destroyed. It was replaced. By design. Governments, retailers, and manufacturers are no longer choosing based on price. They're choosing based on reliability, regulation, alignment. Efficiency used to be king. Now resilience wins. Beijing responded with slogans. Dual circulation, self-reliance, high-quality growth. But none of those fix the core fracture. Global trust, once default, has fractured. And without trust, the world doesn't stop trading. It just stops trading with you. Empty ports aren't just a logistics issue. They're a verdict, a geopolitical signal. And in China's case, it means the center of gravity has already shifted. It started at the ports. In early 2025, container dwell time at Shenzhen surged beyond 12 days. In Ningbo, trucks lined up with nothing to load. At Yantian, export traffic dropped 21% in just 1 quarter. Logistics companies responded fast. Fleet reductions, staff cuts, parking entire units. Then came the warehouses. Full, overstocked, locked. Manufacturers couldn't clear inventory, so they stopped buying raw materials, which meant their suppliers stopped producing. And the chain began to snap. By mid-2025, over 6,000 small and medium-sized factories had ceased operations, many without public notice. Just lights off, doors shut, payrolls unpaid. Some converted into storage units. Others became live stream sets. One former electronics plant in Dongguan now sells tea on TikTok. Workers were next. Without orders, factory shifts were slashed. Gig jobs replaced full-time roles. Wages fell. Benefits vanished. In Jiangsu, a steel worker who earned 8,000 renminbi per month now delivers food for less than half that. 12 hours a day. No health care. No security. The term is flexible employment, but it feels more like surrender. As the industrial base thinned, the cities around them began to change. Hostels emptied. Street vendors multiplied. Real estate ads vanished. 1 in 5 storefronts in key manufacturing zones now stands dark. Local governments feel the pinch. Export taxes dried up. Industrial land leases stalled. Bond repayments loomed, so they cut back. Subsidies were delayed. Public projects were paused. Some municipalities quietly sold off vehicles and reduced lighting on highways. A few began offering tax relief to companies already gone. And the financial system? It bends quietly. Banks extend credit to zombie firms, but only if they agree to stay open. Defaults are restructured. Losses are rolled forward. On paper, they survive. In reality, they rot. One exporter in Wenzhou calls it credit hospice. You're not alive, but not allowed to die. Meanwhile, social pressure builds. Workers live stream their job loss. Graduates sell furniture online instead of applying for work. Middle-aged men return to villages after 15 years. Silent, broke, invisible. Marriage rates drop. Births decline. Hope thins. And still, the narrative continues. High-quality growth. Structural optimization. But outside the TV screen, factories sit silent. Containers sit still. And a generation sits idle. The world outside adapts, shifts, rebuilds. Inside China, the model that once moved the world now can't move itself. And that's how a superpower breaks. Not with a bang, but with containers that never move and workers who never speak. A port doesn't speak. It doesn't protest. It doesn't collapse overnight. It just slows down. The cranes sit still. The trucks stay parked. The containers stack up. Not because of war, not because of sanctions, but because the world chose to move on. China is still producing, still exporting, still trying, but the lanes have shifted. The buyers have adjusted. The center has rotated. And now, the busiest ports in China look less like global engines, and more like storage lots for unwanted goods. The signal is quiet, but clear. When the trade routes reroute, when the world rewires itself without you, you don't need a conflict to fall, just a map that no longer points your way.